Welcome to the 7th video in this series of short videos I'm recording in honor of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the release of my most recent book. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the previous videos, I invite you to do that. As usual, I'm going to begin with a quote, and today I'm beginning with a quote that many of you know. And you are lucky I am not going to butcher it by trying to sing it or rap it. And that, of course, is a big hint to the fact that it is a quote from the great Lin-Manuel Miranda musical, Hamilton. And this quote I'm going to read to you. It's also in my book because I don't want to get the words wrong. It's Washington in Cabinet Battle Number 1 speaking to Alexander Hamilton. Quote, "You're going to need congressional approval and you don't have the votes. Winning was easy, young man. Governing's hard." And of course, far better if you see the musical or listen to the recording and hear it sang and rapped by great performers. But I begin with it today because in the last video, I made the case that the framers had divided power at the founding. And I talk about how they did that. They did that via separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism, and the like. I also talk more importantly about why they did that. And they did that for a very good reason, and that was to preserve liberty. Of course, there's also a downside to dividing power. It makes it difficult to get things done. And the framers turned earliest American public officials recognized this almost immediately. And that's one of the many beautiful things that is depicted in the musical Hamilton. Act 2 finds the new Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, just back from France, locked in a bitter battle with his rival, the newly appointed Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. And much to the dismay of Jefferson and many of his fellow Southerners, Hamilton's fiscal plan, his new fiscal policy, includes several proposals and provisions that they object to, including the assumption of state debts by the federal government and the formation of a national bank, among other things. And a rap ensues, pitting Hamilton against Jefferson in a musical prelude of what is to become one of the most notorious political feuds in American history. If New York is in debt, Jefferson asks, why should Virginia bear it? This financial plan, he says, is an outrageous demand. And back and forth they go. But before Hamilton can respond at one point, Washington ends the meeting and pulls him aside. And he talks to Hamilton and he reminds him not only that governing is difficult, but that in order to get the legislation passed, he's going to have to convince more folks and he's going to have to find a compromise. And it is a musical reminder, again, beautifully done, that one of the biggest challenges the early American officials, our government officials at the federal level had was trying to figure out how to form a majority governing coalition, how to get things done, how to pass policy. This is still one of the biggest challenges we face in the United States today, more than 2 centuries later, how to get things done. And Hamilton, the musical Hamilton, I should say, not only lays out this problem, but it provides insight into some of Washington's advice to Hamilton. He reminds him that there's basically 2 choices. He's either got to convince other people to go along with him, or he's going to have to compromise. And a few scenes later, we learn in the very famous great song, The Room Where It Happens, we learn that Hamilton took Washington's advice and he reaches a compromise. And this is depicted in one of history's most famous private dinner parties, a compromise of 1790. We see this compromise born. In exchange for agreeing to relocate the capital to the base of the Potomac, Jefferson and Madison agreed to support Hamilton's fiscal plan, his fiscal policy. The musical version of this focuses a good deal on compromise as a means to bridging the divisions in the system. In reality, and in fact, there is little attention in the musical paid to the other and arguably more important and longer term solution to the problem. How do you get things done? How do you bridge the division in the system? And what the framers found and what we still have today is the institution of the political parties. And this is one of the many great paradoxes of our Constitution. The same people who framed it, Madison, Washington, Hamilton, the list goes on, were openly critical of parties. And yet, in the end, they decide that it is parties that they need to use to make this government work. Let's not forget, in Federalist 10, Madison, the father of the Constitution, calls factions or political parties the greatest threat to popular government. Likewise, President Washington, in his famous farewell address, warns of the baneful effects of parties, and their views were shared almost to a one by every American framer. Many Americans today still feel this way about political parties, in fact. Not much has changed in that regard. Despite this, and speaking to the importance of this institution as a solution, or what I'll talk about later as a semi-solution to the problem of how to get things done, the same people, the framers who were so critical of political parties, turn to them. And they see these as institutions that are necessary. And Richard Hofstadter, the famous historian, said the framers did not believe in political parties, yet almost as soon as the national government was in operation, they found it necessary to establish them and gradually began to realize they could not govern in their absence. And so the framers realized that these institutions that so many of them disdain, so many people still today find objectionable, were necessary for bridging the gaps that they themselves built into this system. And that is still the case today. While parties are not by any means a solution, and they certainly haven't made all of the divisions go away. They certainly haven't allowed us to make policy successfully in this country. They have, at certain points in time, helped work sort of as semi-solutions in bridging some of these gaps.